welcome to the first After Effects workshop for 2021. Thank you for joining. So in this workshop, we're going to cover the basics for After Effects. So we'll run through all the basic tools you need to make some lovely videos. The idea is that today we're going to go through the basics. So in the coming workshops, we can go into the more advanced stuff a bit faster. And we don't need to explain every step, so we'll make it easier for everyone. This will be the first workshop out of 4. Oops, I need to admit. Yeah, so this is the first workshop. The second one will be held, hosted by Matthew and Sean, which will tackle a social video. So we'll create a social video from the start to finish together. The third workshop will be creating a sports video for social from start to finish, showing you a bit more editing and some transitions and motion tracking. And the fourth workshop will be focused on Blender, which will be 3D software. So it's a bit of a different software, and it's going to be a fun project for sure, but we can discuss that later. This one will be hosted by Andy. So Andy, feel free to go ahead and let's start the workshop.
Okay, right, so basically I don't want to bore you here, so it is going to be a little bit of death by PowerPoint. It's a lot of slides, but I'm going to try and jump in and out of the actual After Effects interface as much as possible. I'm going to start off firstly just by going through as though you just opened up After Effects for the first time. I know a lot of you here are probably going to have used After Effects. Some of you quite a lot. So a lot of this might be going over old ground, and it'll be very familiar to you. But I'm going to approach this from the point of view of you've never opened After Effects before, and so we'll go through the interface. We'll look at where most of the common stuff is that you'll see when you open up, and we'll work from there. The second part of it, which is the more important, because I'll go through the interface fairly quickly. The second part is the more detailed bit where that you're likely to come across things that you've not actually seen before, even if you've used After Effects. Unless you're quite an advanced user, you might not have come across things like parenting or masking. So we will start with, hang on a minute, why is my slide not changing? There we go. So starting off with the interface. So when we first open up After Effects, if you just installed it, your default interface will probably look something like this. Now, as with all Adobe products, you can move things around, you can place them exactly where you want them. Not all the windows that are available will be open. I mean, in this default interface here, we've got a number of windows which are minimized on the right-hand side here. And all of those windows can be placed somewhere else, wherever you want them to be. So if I move on to the next slide. Now, this is actually how I have my interface set up for day-to-day working with a single screen. If you have 2 screens, then I would have it differently. I would have the this area here, which is the what's it called, the preview window, would actually be on the second screen. So with that available like that, I could then stretch all of these out and probably even open up some more windows as well. We'll go through what all of these are in the coming slides. But that's generally a good setup for working with a single screen, which if you're using a laptop, you certainly would be. So the first part of the interface is, as I've just mentioned, this preview window, which is where it's the same as Premiere, where it's your actual source, either your source material or your composition. What you're actually building is where you view it in this area. On this particular example here, I've got rulers enabled at the top and the bottom, and you can, just like other programs, you can drag out rulers and place them to mark your active area. In this particular case here, I've got a composition set up, a square composition, so that I could produce a portrait video within this area or a widescreen video using that area. Go on to more of that, and also Matthew and Sean will go through that when we're actually producing a social video. But that's important if you're having to produce more than one version from the same build, so that you can be aware that certain things might be out of like this area will never appear in a video because it's out of the window. Okay, so there's a number of other functions top and bottom here, but we'll go through that in a moment. So that's basically the preview window. So this is the project panel. This is where, the same as Premiere, other programs, where you will bring in all of the items, you import all of the items that you're going to work with. And the most important thing is this is where you organize them. It's important at this point, and something that I failed with miserably when I first started using After Effects, was keeping everything organized. Put everything in folders, keep everything organized in terms of your assets, your comps. You'll probably end up with lots of different folders here by the time you've actually built something. The toolbar at the top, same as other Adobe products. I'm not going to go through all of these. There's a lot of there's like Puppet tool. There's lots of functions here that you probably would never use. Most important one really is the pointer, which is kind of what will be on all the time, and the text tool, pen tool. You're probably all familiar with quite a few of these, so we don't need to go through all of those. I've placed these, but in case you haven't realised so far, I've placed them kind of roughly. This is the interface where these appear on the actual interface, so that you get an idea of where we're looking at. So again, yeah. So this panel at the top here, the workspaces. This can get quite confusing. Sorry, not this one. I'm confusing myself there. Workspaces is where I have selected what I've been using at the moment. As I say, I've got Andy One Screen selected. So if I switch to here, I've got Andy One Screen selected at the top here. Obviously, you can have lots of different workspaces which you would access up here, and you can set your own workspace. You can then save that workspace. This is all very similar to exactly how all other Adobe products work, so there's no point going into this too much. The timeline. This is probably the most important bit, where this is where you are going to place all your assets and then start manipulating them. There's a number of functions at the top here, which we'll go through later, all of these items here. But this is generally the area on the screen which normally goes at the bottom, just like it does with Premiere, where you arrange all of your assets and start manipulating them. Just above the timeline, there is a strip where you have little tabs, just like in a web browser, basically. I'll just click there. And you can switch between different things you open. Now, again, some people get lost here. They lose stuff and they forget that they've actually clicked on a different comp. So you can have a number of different compositions open at the same time and click between them, as I'm doing here. So I'll go into this properly later on, but the aim here basically is to have compositions within compositions within compositions. So if I had one of these within one of the others, you could just click between them to access them. Let me just switch back to it. The Windows panel is really what we saw minimized at the start in the default. However, this is my setup, so I have my effects laid out here, a number of text organizing tools here, alignment, and obviously the text generator. And also up here we have a preview panel, which I'll come into later how that works. You can basically arrange these however you find best for you. Workflow panel. Now, this is the bit I was meaning a minute ago where a lot of people get confused. Basically, in this preview window here, I could double click on something on this side, an asset, and it would open a preview of it here. Unlike Premiere, where you have a source window and a whatever the other one's called, you on here, if you click on something, an asset, it will open a preview of it here. Your composition still exists, it's just that you've selected away from it. So I can show you that here. If I open an asset here by double clicking on it, it's now opened it over here. My composition is still there, it's just the fact that I've opened something over the top of it. So if you ever lose your composition, it's probably that mistake. Again, I did this quite a lot, and I was panicking, where's my composition gone? And it's because I completely forgot that this panel was at the top here. So you can just close that and you've got your composition back. Right, preview settings window. So as a general working rule, because not all of you will have a high-end computer like us, that even then when we're working, we have the quality turned down because it massively slows everything down if you're previewing and manipulating everything on full quality. It's best to run it on quarter quality, which is done by this selector here. This here is just a zoom level, so you can, like here, I can use my mouse wheel to scroll in, and you notice it changes down the bottom here from 50. So you can go right in on stuff to have a look at it, or move it out. Obviously you can press on that and select the zoom quality, but it's easier to use the mouse. Here you have the different quality settings from quarter to full. Like I say, if you go to full, you'll see the difference straight away in terms of how it looks, but it will slow your computer down. It's best to work in quarter, and then when you've manipulated everything and you're happy and you're wanting to check to make sure that it all looks good, you can then switch it to full quality just to have a look. So the best rule of thumb is to work on a lower quality. There are a number of other boxes along here. This one toggles whether you can actually see any mask edges, which we'll come on to later. There's a transparency setting there. So despite the fact that this composition background here is actually black, if I toggled this on and off, this would go transparent. Let's show you this. So at the moment this is black, but it isn't actually black. If I press that, you'll see that now we can see there's actually nothing there. And if you rendered this out as a PNG sequence with an alpha, it would just be this, and this would not be here because there's nothing there. The rest of these, I mean, there's title safe areas, there's grids, there's all kinds of things here that you can select on and off to help. We don't need to go through any of these really, we can bypass that. Right, that's pretty much the interface. Now, there's obviously shortcuts for everything here. This is just a quick list. I mean, it's nowhere near all of it. It's just a quick screen grab of some of the controls. So you can, if you want to find out the actual keybind for a particular thing, you can either go on to find it through the action through up here, like say a new solid or something. There it is, Control Y, and then memorize it from there. Right, that's the interface at the moment. Is there any questions at this point on that? Are we all happy so far?
Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. If you don't understand anything, just ask a question. And we'll
I've gone through that very quickly because I don't think it's that difficult. It's you know, you'll find things. We will go. There's a lot of buttons there that we're going to go into now in terms of the basic operation. But that was just to show you what each window is and what it does. Okay, so we'll move on to some basic operation now. So as I said right at the start, the important thing, and this is, we cannot emphasize this enough, is to be organized. And right from the start, make sure that everything is placed into folders. and properly named as well. That's the other important thing. Now Jake has this, when we first started, we have a folder arrangement here, which we would place on our drive as our project folder. Now each one of these, well, obviously this one here is where the After Effects project will be saved. Excuse me, I just need to look. This folder is where all your videos, all your images, everything would be placed in there. The exports is obviously when you're rendering stuff out. Any music that you're using, the actual Premiere project, if you're rendering out and placing legal lines, anything like that on afterwards, the Premiere project would be saved in here, and any sound effects used with the music in the project. AE exports would be if you exported PNG sequences, anything like that, you would place in there for then importing into Premiere to arrange and create the whole thing. So your first step with any project you're setting up would be to have a folder arrangement ready to find all your assets, place them in, and start from there. Now, when you open up After Effects, the first thing you should do is save the project into here. So you would obviously go Save As here, and then navigate your way to that folder and save your first copy. And it's also project. Yeah, okay. So we can move on to the next one. Once you've saved and you've named your folder, it's important to, again, if this is the first time you use After Effects, what you need to understand is After Effects needs a lot of disk space to generate previews. So what you need to do is go into your preferences and locate where that media is going to be stored. And you can do this by going Edit Preferences, Media and Disk Cache, and you'll get this box here come up under this tab here. Now you can tell it where you would like this placed. Now I've got a disk cache of 100 gigabytes, and this particular drive here is my solid state drive, which is apart from my operating system drive. It's important to always, if you can, have a separate drive away from your operating system for storing this. It's because if the two are trying to talk, they're trying to access information at the same time, it's going to slow everything down. So you can select the folder there. If you have another drive, if you're working off a laptop, you might not have that option. But if you can, try and make that drive somewhere else. Now, I constantly have problems with After Effects where things aren't looking the way they're supposed to, something crashes. One of the easiest ways to get yourself out of jail, so to speak, is to sort problems out, is to go and empty your disk cache. A lot of the times that will solve any problems you're having in terms of preview problems. What sometimes happens is the preview window might stick, it might stop and not be updating, something like that. Go and empty your disk cache because it will fill up really quickly. Basically what that will do is that will remove all of your preview media, because when you're going along, you're building stuff, what After Effects is doing, it's generating previews and it's saving those in that disk folder. If you go and clear it out, it removes all of that and it then has to make those previews from scratch, which means if there's any errors in there, it gets rid of them. So it's a great way of clearing that out so that you're starting, well, not starting afresh with the project, but the media is starting fresh. So it's cleared out all the problems. So that's a good hint to clear out stuff there.
Yeah, and just to add, usually whenever you finish a project, ideally you empty your disk cache.
Yes.
After Effects always ideally needs an empty disk cache. For example, on my computer, I have 8 terabytes for disk cache, and it's always full. So even 8 terabytes is not enough. So whenever you finish off a project, empty it and start again fresh. It usually solves a lot of problems, as Andy said.
Especially important if you are using the same disk as your operating system. you will quickly slow down your computer if you're using that.
Yes,
and you're filling it up like that.
Especially the designers, you have the laptop with 150 gig of storage, so After Effects will eat it up most of the time. So if your laptop is full, I would open After Effects and empty your disk cache. So that will help out every time.
Yeah. Okay, so we don't really need to go, but again, there's other things you can do down here, which we don't really need to go through right now. Okay, that's everything for that one. Right, the next really important thing. I am taking a bit longer on this because these are the common mistakes that people don't do. They're like, oh, I need to use After Effects, and they go straight in and they don't bother setting this stuff up, and then it comes back and bites you later on. It's important to set up an auto save pretty much straight away. I don't know what the default is with After Effects, but I work with a 5-minute. I'm happy to lose 5 minutes worth of work. Anything more than that, and I will have done significant changes and I will have forgotten what those are. And if I haven't had it auto saving within those 5 minutes, I'm going to lose a considerable amount of work. So it's best to go in, set up auto savers straight away, make sure that you're happy with the interval that you have.
You're going to lose work and your temper as well, Andy.
Oh yeah. You will thank yourself later if something crashes that you've only lost 5 minutes of changes and not half an hour's worth or whatever the default setting is. Half an hour would be a disaster if I lost half an hour's worth. Other people like to also, I know Jake does, I don't tend to do this, they also go and save actual new versions of the After Effects project, and not as an auto save, but as an actual new version of. So every now and then you would go save as, and you save as another version. So you have lots of different versions of the project. I can hear Jake's going to.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is. I mean, as you all know, you can't trust Adobe. No. So I tend to save a version myself. For example, in the Christmas video I came up to a version 1500 of a project file. I do that because sometimes, especially when you use external plugins, it can corrupt your project file. And when you corrupt a project file, you lose it completely. So to be safe, I would rather have a bit more megabytes on my hard drive and save other versions. But with this autosave, currently, for example, it's saving 10 project versions. You can increase that if you want. So at least you'll have 10 backups in this case.
Okay. One thing is, if let's just say the worst happens and you do have a crash, and you do have to go back and open your last autosave. One thing that's important to remember, and it's easy to forget to do this, is once you've opened it and you're heaving a big sigh of relief because you've saved your project and you've got it back open again, is then make sure that you then save that autosave back as your working file. Otherwise, the autosave will then go and autosave over your autosave, if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm confusing you with that, but you need to then be saving from that point as your original project. I probably confused you there.
Adobe, I mean, doesn't really make sense, but
because once you've opened that autosave, it is your autosave project that is open, not your original After Effects project.
Yeah, basically, if you open your autosave, After Effects can replace your current project file because it's an autosave. So you need to save it externally. It doesn't really make sense, but nothing makes sense in Adobe. So that's how it.
Okay. Right, let's move on. Right, now this is where we get into the more complicated stuff. So going back to the timeline, there are 6 main items that will end up on your timeline. This is an example timeline here that I have. There's obviously composition, video files, image files, solids, shape layers, and text layers. So here we have a sound layer, which I haven't got up here. Saying all that. This is compositions. We have text layer, shape layers, text, image file, more compositions. Now, as a general rule, this is not actually good, because most of these should actually be in compositions within themselves. And I'll go into that later. Having them within compositions allows you to manipulate them a bit easier without destroying things. I'll go into that later. But that's basically what will end up on your timeline. It will end up looking something like that. So what is a composition? So this is where After Effects is completely different to Premiere. You are working not with straight sources of video where you are importing them, editing them up, and then exporting. You're placing them within compositions, putting effects on them. A composition is like a placeholder where you can manipulate, you can place the video, anything within a composition, and then you can open that composition up within other compositions. So as I've said here, you can have comps within comps within comps, to as many as you like.
Like Inception.
Yeah, it literally, I mean, I've opened projects that have been made by other people, and I've gone down 30 layers of clicking within a comp. Oh, there's another comp going in within that, and it's gone on and on. Yeah, and yeah, a lot of these downloaded projects that you can buy and things like that. When you go into them, manipulate them, if they're badly set up ones, that you can go into massive amounts of layers before you find the actual thing that you want to manipulate. If they're well set up ones, then you won't be going too deep, hopefully.
I think for designers kind of to swap into motion, the best thing to try to understand that comps work like smart layers in Photoshop, basically. So you can group up anything in a smart layer. If you save that smart layer, it will update in the final file. So that's a composition, basically.
Exactly. So they look like this. Now, as we said earlier, very important to name them. So that once they're on your timeline here, if they're just comp 1, comp like this, comp 3, you don't know what on earth is inside that comp until you actually double click on it and it opens it up here. As you can see here, I've got the rotator comp open there. Even though we're actually displaying this composition, all of this is this one. I always call my master composition the construct. I've actually got my rotator comp open there. I have slider, which is, oh, not slider, where is it? It's not even in. Oh, slider is probably a composition that's within one of these other compositions. So this is what I'm saying. And certainly that composition is that one there. Mobile screen there is actually within both of these two comps. So this is what I'm saying. You can have comps within comps, but you can have them open just by double clicking on that comp. Oops, I've got to go back one. I actually clicked on it as though I was actually in After Effects there. You can double click on that and it will open that composition in the window up here, and you can then click between them. So to create a composition, very easy. You can do the slow way of doing it up here, File, Composition, New Composition, or you can go Control N. Or there's a quick way on here, you can just click here and it'll bring up this window, which we'll go back to. So there's a number of ways you can do that. Now, when this window pops up, this is very important that you input the correct information at this point. It's also, when you press Control N, it's important that you tell it where you're wanting this comp to go. If you haven't got this highlighted at the point where you go Control N or File New, whatever, it will place the comp outside of your folder structure, which is fine. You can drag it into there, but it's easier just to press there first and make sure that it's actually going within your comps folder. Now, I here haven't named these because these are from the example exercise. Going down here, I think this is on the next screen, isn't it? No, it's not. You can name the comp at the top here. Once you've named it here, it will change the name when it actually opens it down here. Setting a resolution. This is important. This is where we were talking here about, close that, about the shape here. I know that comp 3 here is a different shape. I've got 1280 by 1920 here. So that is the shape of your composition here, your window is determined by what you place in here. Now this one is the square one, the 1920 by 1920. The most important thing here, again, to avoid a world of pain, make sure you have square pixels selected. If you have something else, it's just going to be a nightmare. So make sure that's one thing to always check. It should not be moved off that. There's no reason to move. Done it again. There's no reason to move it off that. Just something to check. Most of the time you'll be on 25 frames per second, so that's set in there. Just again, it should hopefully if your project settings are set correctly in your preferences, that should be on 25. Doesn't really matter about setting the resolution here because you can change it as you're going along, but if you set it at quarter, then it'll automatically open it at your working resolution. When you go to export, it'll automatically export it at full quality. It won't export it at quarter quality, so you don't need to worry about that. Best to have timecode starting at 0, otherwise it just looks untidy on your windows. And set a duration that don't put an hour here or something like that, because as you'll see back on your timeline, you'll have to be zooming in and out, and it's pointless. Put a duration in there that's the maximum duration of the video you're creating. And you can set a background color, but I always keep mine on black. So you then press OK. Next one. Okay, so that will then, if I go back to here, that will then open a composition in here. Now, obviously, I've imported stuff into there, so I'll use that one. So at the moment, it will look like that, except it'll be square if it was on those settings, and there's nothing down here. So you'll need to import some assets. Now, I already have some imported up here. So what we would do here is click on the assets folder and then go and locate the files that we want to bring in. Now there is a settings that I was just mentioning here about your import preferences. So if you go to preferences, you can then tell it here what frame rate you want to bring them in at, and that can speed things up. So file, import file, or use the shortcut Control-I. Navigate it'll open up your normal Windows or Mac window. Go and find your files and open them, and it will then import them into your assets folder down here. So once you've got to this stage, you've got some assets in there, and you might want to start. I'll drag on down. Okay, so we have assets in the window now. Sorry, I was just reading something there. Right. One of the other parts, so that's how to import video, still images. One of the other 6 that were on the list there was solids. Now, solids have a number of uses, but one of the main ones that we use a solid for is to place effects onto. They are basically like a placeholder in a way. You can use them for adding just a color to the background, where you can drop a ramp on there or a gradient color, or you can just have it like this one, a black solid to colorize your background. As I showed you before, that background, even though it looks black, isn't actually black. So if, like here, I turn that transparency off, that background isn't actually there. However, if I drop, I don't know if this is the right size, if I drop that underneath this one on here, we now have a black background. So that's one use for them. However, if I wanted to place an effect, what can I put on there? Oh boy.
Put a gradient. I guess.
Yeah, I'm just there we go. A gradient ramp. Whoa. Try that again. Selected too many things there. It's because I've got a big mouse. Now, let me turn that top layer off. Yeah. See, if I wanted to place a color gradient on there, something like that. That's basically now that black solid has an effect on it, and it's no longer showing black. It's showing whatever effect that we've placed on there. That works with quite a lot of those effects. So it's almost like a placeholder for that. So to create a black solid, there doesn't actually have you don't have a solid folder by default unless you've created it. If you have, just select that black folder, hover over that black folder like here, and then go layer. No, you have to have the timeline. You have to have the timeline selected as well. Layer. In fact, that's a good point actually on that point there. If this is ever ghosted, it's because you don't have your timeline, because it wants to place the item. If I remove that, it needs to know where you're placing the item. So now that I have that selected, if I go layer, new solid, and press OK, it's now placed a solid into this folder, and it's also put it on the timeline. So it's quite quick and simple. Okay. So I've gone through that really. Creating a new solid like that. You can select the color there, exactly the same as before. Select the resolution. If you press make comp size, it will that folder time whatever your resolution is down here for the active composition. That's the size it will make the. Sorry, I'm jumping backwards and forwards too much. That's the size that it will place in there. So if I clicked that whilst I was on a 1280 by 1920 composition, it will actually change this to be 1280 there by 1920. It's just a quite nice, quick way of doing it rather than having to sit here and type in 1280.
Yeah, and the quick thing I want to add, a solid isn't vector. So you can't zoom infinitely into it because it will pixelate. So keep in mind, a solid is not a vector layer.
That's a very good point, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of jumping ahead of the slides here. So basically, yeah, it'll open the solid in a folder there, and it'll place it on timer. We've done that. Right, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Previewing. Now, unlike Premiere again, normally, as long as you're on a decent computer when you're editing in Premiere, you should be able to play your video. Unless you put a lot of effects on it, you should be able to actually play your video straight away and see what it is that you've done in terms of your edit. After Effects is different. It cannot play the previewed item straight out. It can't do it. Especially once you've got lots of effects on it, it just is not possible. So the way it gets around it is it makes these preview files, which is what I was mentioning before, that was going onto your media cache. Now this box here is where you, once you've built something, you've made a change, and you want to see how it looks, you would play the selected area into the media cache. Again, this is where it's important that you're on a low resolution. If you have full here, which is fine if you're doing a final check before you're exporting. You could do a quick preview. Well, I don't want to be quick. A preview on full quality, and you'll get to see exactly what the video will look like. But it will take a while for After Effects to place it into the media cache. So it's best to do quick checks on quarter resolution. I'll show you how to select the area that you want to preview, but you would press play here or use the spacebar, which is what I normally do. And what it will do is it will run along the timeline. At the moment, here, let's swap that back over. As you can see, when I had the black solid there, oops, click that back on. Why is it not going back on? There we go. Turn that one off. Because this black solid, there's nothing there to render, we have a green line along here, which means if I wanted to play that, it would be very boring because it's just blood. Whoa, it's got sound as well. Okay, turn that off. If I just play that black line, it will play because there's nothing there really for it to show. However, if I switch those sources over and now it's the piece of video active, as you can see, this green line has completely disappeared. And for me to actually play that, I would need to come up here and I would need to actually play it into I'll just do a little bit. It will, as you can see, it's quite quick because there's nothing complicated about it. It's on full quality, but it's actually a straight piece of video, so it's managing to do it. It's because my computer's quite fast. And now, once it's all turned green, I can now play it, and it's fine. If I make a change to that video, I'll go through how to do this in a moment. If I rotate it, you'll probably notice that the green line has now disappeared. That's because I've made a change. Those preview files that it generated to play that are irrelevant. They're gone. They're still actually on the media cache, but they're no longer relevant. So it's removed them. However, if I went Control Z and took that condition, that attribute back to what it was, it's now gone back to green because now those files are relevant again because nothing has changed. Changing that back, what you will have is just the frame that your cursor is, this blue line is sitting over. You'll notice there's a little green because it has actually rendered just that one so we can see it. So if I move anywhere, click on anywhere else on the timeline, it will quickly just render that frame and that frame only so that you can see it. Okay, so and you can grab hold of this blue line, as long as your effects, whatever it is you're doing, aren't too complicated, it will try to render it in, and it's doing a good job because it's only video. It will try to render it into the media cache as you're dragging that along. So that's quite useful if it's a fairly simple piece of video, and I'll show you in a moment how you can solo that particular layer to enable you to manipulate it without having to work out all the other layers underneath it as well. So let's just go back to, I probably jumped way ahead there, to the next slide. Yes, so there we go. So, so this green line shows you what's ready to play. This blue cursor here, this blue line as we were going to refer to it, is your play cursor. It's what shows you the point along the piece of video or image file or whatever it is you're looking at. That particular time frame, 1 second and however many frames that is, you're viewing this frame right here. And you can, as you saw me do, you can move along backwards and forwards. Now, if you only wanted to preview of your whole timeline, you only wanted to watch from 0 seconds to 4 seconds, these little handlebars are just above your clip. I'll show you where those are in a second. You can move those to just the section that you want to view. Then when you press the play and you render this in, it will only render in to there, and then it will be fit, and then it won't go any further. It will stop there, and you can then play it. So you don't have to render in the entire length 15 seconds, excuse me, your 15 seconds or whatever your length is, you can actually just use that 4 seconds. Those bars are these ones here. So here I could just grab hold of it and drag it down. As you can see, it moves this active area down as well. So now if I just drag that along, it would, or if I press play here, it will just render in that section, and when it gets to there, it will stop and go back to there. And it will just continue to play that until I press the space bar again and stop it. Okay. Right, this is some of these functions along here in this area. I'll go through them quickly first. Now, motion blur, if you have any item that's moving, if you're moving a piece of video, an image file, something like that, to make that motion look smoother, it's always best to put some motion blur on, unless there's some reason sometimes where you wouldn't do that. Now, you can put motion blur on for each individual layer. And this is the button you would click on for that particular layer. So you will click it on there. Now, this is like the master switch for motion blur. So you can actually turn that off, and when you're previewing back, it won't add the motion blur on because it will slow. In order to do motion blur, it has to, the frame that you're using, that it's rendering, plus depending on how many preview settings you've got set, it needs to look at the 6 frames before, 6 frames after, or even 10 frames before, 10 frames after, and it kind of blends all those frames together in order to get that movement. So when you're previewing, when you're doing anything in terms of building, it's best to have that turned off. So you can just use that switch there to turn your master off, but still have the motion blur turned on there, ready for when you do export. Jake reminded me something the other day that when you go to export, even if you've got that turned off, it will automatically turn that on when you go to export. And it will then add motion blur to any layer that you've got motion blur switched on. So with these ones down here, if I wanted this video, not that it's moving really, to have motion blur on, I could just do that, but I don't want motion blur on the black layer, so I would leave that one off. As you can see, there's the master switch, which I can turn off and on. Okay, so that's motion blur. This box here, this can scare, if you don't understand what this does, people can lose layers quite easily here. If you click this layer on, and I've actually lost layers where I've actually clicked this button where I've been meaning to press other ones and then been like, where's it gone? Again, these are the master switches up here, and these are the switches to actually activate it for that layer. This hides the layer. So if it's something that's like a reference layer or something like that, which using that information from this layer, like it's a text or something, and then you're using that text to generate some effects or something, but you don't want that text to be visible. Once you place that, sorry, done it again, clicked on the window. Once you've selected that layer and it's on your timeline, and don't want it cluttering up the timeline, you can do what's called making it shy, which is you can just click that button and it'll hide that layer once this master switch is activated. So let me show you that. So this black solid here, I'm not actually using it, so I've got it not visible, which you can switch on and off with using this switch here. And if I wanted to get that out of the way, it's still there, but I want to hide it from my timeline so it's not cluttering it up. I could then click on shy there. Now, as you've noticed, it hasn't actually disappeared though, it's still there because I haven't turned my master switch on. Once I turn the master switch on, it disappears. It's still there, it's just hidden. So as soon as I turn the master switch off, back it comes. and then I can take it back off again by hiding it. Okay. Right, these ones I don't really need to demonstrate. This switch toggles on and off any effects that are applied to that layer. So if you put on some really complicated effects onto that layer, but you don't want them to be slowing the computer down, you just want to activate them later on when everything else is finished, you can just quickly toggle those effects on and off by clicking that button there. There's no master switch for that, it's just for each layer. This particular one here, this is more when you're going advanced, but it activates the 3D function for that layer, which adds lots of extra parameters into your transform functions, but we don't need to go into that now. If there's effects on that layer that you want to affect all of the layers below, you can make that layer an adjustment layer by selecting this function here. You'll be very familiar with this because it's exactly the same for Photoshop, Illustrator, blending mode. You can change that to screen, add opacity, change, whatever, using that function there. Right, solo. This is one that is very, very useful if you're on a slower computer and you're finding that things are slowing down. If I wanted to, let me just go back to a comp that's got more than one thing in it. Now these two here, if I was wanting to do something with these, but I didn't want any effect that I placed upon this one to be seen, I can just solo this layer here, which means, let me get some more things in here so that, some more stuff in here. If I only wanted to view this layer here, I could just put solo on there. All the other layers will disappear, and then when I'm actually previewing its movement, it's only showing me just that layer, which means that the computer doesn't have to work out what all the other layers are doing, and I can just get that one fine-tuned exactly what I want that to do, and it doesn't have to also work out all the rest of these at the same time. Excuse me, I need to cough. So that's quite a useful function for when you're building stuff to speed things up. Whilst I've got that layer and I have got some movement selected there, I'll also show you the, which one is it that's moving? I think it's that one. The motion blur quickly. There we go. And let's just solo that layer. No, wrong one. There we go. So, oops. I've got a very big mouse here and I'm struggling to make it do what I want it to do. It's not clicking where I want it to click. That's strange. There's the motion blur that I was referring to. So it's taking the frames before and the frames afterwards, and it will, when actually played, it will make the movement look far more realistic. Okay. There you go. No, we do it for time. 11 o'clock. That's fine. Right, this function, just as you saw me do a minute ago, where I actually played the video by accident and it had sound on it, which I forgot. There's, for each layer, there is a sound button which toggles on and off the sound for that layer. Now, if you go to export and you've forgotten and you want to export the sound with it, you need to make sure that those are on, otherwise that sound will not go out with that layer. So it's important to, if you're, say, using the sound from a particular layer and you're wanting it to be there, to remember to put that back on if you've turned it off whilst you're actually creating stuff. It's caught me out a few times that where I've actually gone to export and completely forgotten to turn the sound back on. You've seen me do this already, but that layer at the end, the I button, that turns that layer on off. So that's different from the shine function, because it's meaning it's turning off it visually in here. It's not actually hiding the layer on your timeline. It's just temporarily removing it. Now, that's where it's a lot quicker to use the solo function and to go through and take the eye off. Say you've got 90 layers here. You can imagine how long it would take to remove all of those. It would take forever. So that's where the solo function, you can just quickly pick the layer you're wanting and you'll only see that layer highlighted there. So once again, if you have forgotten, if you've hidden a layer, if that is turned off there and you go to export it, that layer will not be exported. So it's important to make sure that, I can't turn it back on now, there we go. It's important to make sure that those eyes are on for anything that you're actually wanting to be export. This here is the time function, the time code. So obviously it's starting at 0 there. If you're on 25 frames per second, that should go up to 24 and then clicks over to 25. I don't know if I'm stating the obvious here, but I've had somebody ask me, why does it not go to 25? That's because 0 is a frame. That's why there is still 25 frames there, but 0 is actually a frame. 0, and then when you get to 24, it has actually covered 25 frames, and that is the start of the next second there. Right, label, you can, once, I generally tend not to do this, but you can actually label the layers up using this function. You can give it a different color. So if you want all your video files to be, it's a little bit brighter, that's it. All your video files to be purple and your solid or something like that. Well, there you go, it's automatically done it there. You can actually have them different colors. So if that aids with finding things a lot quicker. You can spot them. So you can
believe me, it's useful when you have a lot of layers in the composition.
Yeah, once you start getting a lot, you know, it aids a lot. As I said before, hopefully you'll comp things up quite a bit anyway. So that generally tends to be why I don't bother to do it, but it can be very useful, as Matthew says, it can be very useful. Right, now into how do we actually start to animate stuff. So when you have a video file, as we've got here that I've got on my timeline, you'll see this little arrow here. You click on that and you'll get the word transform come up, and you click on that little arrow again and you'll get all these functions drop down here. This is where you start to animate what you want to do with this video file. Now you can see you've got anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. It's pretty obvious what all those are. I'll come into anchor point in a moment though, because that can catch people out. In terms of, you also get an audio function if you want to manipulate the audio in any particular way. Even though you do get audio within After Effects, it's generally best not to edit it within After Effects. It's better to use Premiere to start adding your sound on. If you start messing around with sound in After Effects, it's just, I just find it's a waste of time. It's easier to do it on output. You have far greater control over what you're doing. So I would generally ignore that. If there is any sound on a video file that I'm wanting to export, I'll just let it export it at whatever level it naturally is, and then I will manipulate it in Premiere when it's being edited. So each layer, yeah. So that will open up. Now, if you're making this a 3D item, which we're not going to go into here, and you have this box just in the corner here clicked on, you will actually get extra things popping up under your transform here. You'll get extra items coming on. So in terms of editing, animating, if you're wanting to change the scale of the piece of video, which is what we're doing this, you'll see there's a little little stopwatch next to each item. At the moment, there's no keyframes on the timeline for this item that we've opened. If you click on that stopwatch, what it will do is wherever this blue line is on your timeline, it will place a keyframe. And at that point, that means whatever attribute here, at 100%, and we haven't done anything to it, that piece of video will be at 100% scale at that point. Now, you also take note of that there's another box that will appear here, and that will become blue. That enables you to then place a further keyframe on. However, if you haven't moved this line and it's still over here and you press that, it will remove that keyframe because it thinks you're trying to take it away. Now, if you move the blue line to a new point down your timeline, a few frames down, don't at this point press the stopwatch again, because that will remove your keyframes. That will be telling After Effects you're removing everything. What you need to do is click on this keyframe generator here. And as you can see here, it will place a new keyframe there. However, we haven't actually changed anything at this point that I have here, but it would still be at 100%. If you wanted to change that at this point, now that I've placed the keyframe there, you can either change it now down to 48%, or if I just moved down the timeline and I haven't generated a keyframe here, one will automatically be placed on the timeline by changing this here. So I'll show you that now. So let's go back to a layer where we've only got one thing. Let's get rid of that. So here's my drop down. So nothing's here being animated at this moment. So I'm going to click the stopwatch. It's now placed my keyframe there. Now what I want this to do is I want this entire layer to just disappear down to 0 by 1 second. So I could either move down to 1 second here, and as I say, I could press this now and then type in 0 there, or it's just easier while I'm there to just type in 0, and as you can see, a keyframe has been generated there. And if I now scroll back up here, and let's say that it will try to render it in, which it's doing as I'm doing it, it will now take it from 100 to 0, and that's basically our animation. And obviously I can then go on and place other keyframes in. Basically that process is exactly the same for any of these attributes here. So I could also, at the same time, I could activate opacity. I could go down to here. Now obviously the layer is there, but it's at 0. But I could, at this point, type in 0 opacity as well, which means whilst this is dropping back in scale to 0, it's also fading out, as you can see, down to 0. Okay. So that's how we that's how we add keyframes. Now to make that movement smoother, it's always best to things do not naturally go from being completely still to suddenly moving at full speed, just like that. It doesn't happen. Natural, smooth movement, things start and they speed up and then they slow down again before they get to their final destination between the first keyframe and the second keyframe. That's called easing. There's a function called easy ease, which will apply that automatically to those keyframes. If you want to just do that and settle with the automatic one, what you can do is you can just grab, I won't press this here because otherwise I'll move to the next slide. You can drag over these two and right click, and you'll get this box come up and you go keyframe assistant, easy ease, or you can press F9 whilst these keyframes are selected. Now, say you have to select these keyframes because you might have lots of keyframes selected here. You might want easy ease adding to these particular keyframes, but not the subsequent ones down here. You might want a different kind of ease, and I'll go through these in a second, but it's important to have the particular ones. So here, I would just go here, grab those two, and then I'm going to press F9, and what you see there now is these icons have changed. This tells me that I've added easy ease And what this will do is, as I'm playing through it, it will start slowly and then it will speed up and then slow down again before it reaches its final point. I know you can't see that very well in that movement. Let's get rid of opacity. 100. Oh, I thought I clicked that off. Obviously I didn't. So that's now actually speeding up, and yeah, it's not very good, but here we go. So as you saw there, our icons changed when we added the easy ease to these icons. So you know that they're not linear movements at this point. They're now easing in and easing out equally. I'll show you that on a graph in a moment. There were two other functions there that you could select, which was easy ease out and easy ease in. Now, if you want something to, let's say something was moving out of your animation, you might want it to start off slow, but you're not bothered about it. It's gone right out of your window. You can't see it, and you just want it to start off slow. That would be easy easing out. It will slowly start, and then it will just build up to maximum speed and still be at maximum speed by the time it hits your end keyframe. And likewise, easy ease in, you might want it coming in at full speed and then slowing down to end up where you want it to be. So if, let's say, you had a piece of text that's not within your active screen, it's off screen at the moment, you want that to fly in, but you want it to settle nicely and slowly into place. You would use easy ease in, and it would basically start at full speed and then slow down as it reaches the final keyframe. Now, in order to see the graph that shows you how this is happening, you need to click on this button here, which is on just above where all the other ones were, motion blurs. Basically, when you have this, whatever keyframes you have active, it will then display. I'll show you that here. So I've got those two keyframes active there, and what you'll see when you press this is you'll get a line graph pop up like this. So let me zoom in on this. This down here allows you to zoom in. I think I've got this later on in the presentation, but this allows you to zoom in and out on your timeline. So if I press this button, make sure that's active. So you're clicking on that, turns these blue, so it knows now that I'm wanting to look at this attribute. And then I have a graph. Now, as you can see, this is basically your speed here. So it's going through, it's starting off at 0%, and it's speeding up to maximum speed and then slowing down again by the time it reaches infinity down there. Now, if I change that, let me just click off that, and I'll change those now to, which I can, I think, an easy. No, I need to remove that first. Give me a second. Let me just go back to our linear one first. So now there's no easy ease placed on there, and with no easy ease, it's running at 100% all the way across. So it will start suddenly and end suddenly. There's no easing added on there. So now I'm going to add easy ease in. Now if I look at my graph, it's starting not quite at full speed. It still puts a little bit of a curve on there. But basically it will start at full speed and will then slow down as it comes to its final point. And likewise, if it was easy ease out, it would start off slowly, and you would have this the other way around. So it will look something, your easy ease, if it's to ease in and ease out, will look something like this. However, then what it actually gives you, as you saw, that equal amount on either side, generally produces quite rubbish looking movement. It's always better to have your graph tipped more in this direction so that its travel to its final point is far slower than its initial movement. So you would have it tilted more this way. Now the way to do that is to use these little toggles. So if before I clicked on this, these would not be here. If I clicked on that keyframe there, on this graph editor, you'll get these little toggles come up and you can pull them across. I will show you that here. So here, as you can see, there's nothing selected there, but if I click here, I get these little toggles come up. And if I wanted this to slow down, because at the moment, this is still, it's slowing down, but it's slowing down still at quite a speed. And I want it to slow down and fall into its last position far slower. So I can pull this across. Oops, make sure that that stays on 0 there, because it can sometimes jump off. So now this will go really fast and then slow down a lot quicker, and it will finally drop into its end point. I really shouldn't have used scale here. I actually should have used a movement across the screen because it's quite difficult to see. But basically that is slowing down a lot smoother than it was. So you would start off a lot faster and then gradually slow down when it's coming into place. Right, so is there any questions on easy easing at this point, or we can come back to it at the end, but I think, is everyone still there?
Yeah, we'll show it in detail in the coming workshops for sure.
Exactly.
Graph editor, what makes an amateur motion graphics artist into a professional artist. So exactly. Graph editor, you need to learn it by heart, but we'll show it later on for sure.
And I guess it's what makes an animation look more natural as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, we shall move on. Right, any piece of anything I was just saying as we were preparing this this course. The last time I made a video without using a mask, I cannot remember. It pretty much, I use it. You have to use it every time. So masking is very important. I mean, obviously you're all using this sort of stuff in Illustrator. Reset this a second. With this, sorry, just give me a second to reset this so we can actually see what we're doing. Back to 0. Okay, right, we'll just take that down a little bit. Now, if on this particular bit of video here, let me just zoom in over here, I'm wanting to use this area here, the actual gameplay, but I'm not wanting all this rubbish around the edge. I want to clear it out. What you can do is use a mask. I'd say we use this all the time. I'm just going to minimize that for a second so I should. So we can go layer, no, not there, I'm in the wrong place. Layer, new mask. You have to have the layer down here that you're sending it to activated, selected, new mask. Now what that'll do, that didn't seem to do anything obvious straight away, but it has. If I drop this back open again, you'll see that we've now got a new item here, masks. And you can have multiple masks on a layer. So this one is placed as mask 1. You can name it if you wish. I generally tend not to because I don't have that many masks on it. It's normally just 1, maybe 2 masks per layer. Hang on, I need to cough. Excuse me. And again, it has another little triangle, so I can click on that and I get a number of options open to manipulate it. The other thing that happened over here was we got this box placed around the whole layer. You can change the color of this box by clicking in here. And if I want it to be bright red, it can be bright red if it's disappearing into your background and you can't see it. So it's quite easy. Now, if I wanted to move the whole box, I would make sure I have mask path activated there, not the bottom one, that one. And then when I click the largest of these 4 items here, it will move the whole box around, which is not what we want to do on this time, because we want to actually place it in specific places. So you could animate this entire mask using that function by using, again, the stopwatch placed in with a keyframe and another keyframe to another place, and it could animate this mask moving in and out or wherever you wanted it to go. But in this occasion, what we want to do is place this mask to fit this piece of video on these edges. So to do that, we need the mask expansion selected. And now with that selected and the, what's this one called? What is that tool called? Selection tool, that's the one. Couldn't think of the word. The selection tool selected up here, or the pen tool up here selected. I'm going to use this one for the moment. I can pick each one of these toggles and bring it to where I want it to go. Like that. Again, for precision, you can zoom in using H for hand, temporarily held down. I can move to the corner, and I can move these into exactly where I want them to be, and zoom back out again. Like such. I'll just do it quickly like that. If I wanted to place a feather on that edge, I could add a feather, and then it will go all nice and blurry on the edge, which sometimes can be useful, but in this occasion we don't need that. And also the mask opacity, I can bring it, the item that it's masking, just the active area, I can mask in and out. Oops, let's go back to 100. What was I going to say? Yeah. Now, if there was an extra little bulge up here, obviously that's fine with a nice square object like that. Let me make sure I've got the right thing activated here. That's fine with a square object like that, but there might be an extra shape. This is exactly the same as Illustrator, using the pen tool basically. Use the pen tool, hover over the line, put another, not keyframe, I was going to call that, another nodule in there, and then you can drag out what you want. So if there was an extra bit there that we wanted to show, or if we wanted to put a curve in, again, exactly the same as anything else, you can hover over the, I don't know what to call those, nodule, whatever, and it will turn to a little triangle when you're over it while you're holding Alt down, and you can do that. And that way you get a curve, and you can do kind of crazy stuff with that. So you can get basically, let's move to the correct thing here. So I've gone through all that. There's your frame around the item. And we've clicked on mask expansion. We've drawn out an area. Used the pen tool to manipulate the edges, and we've put any curves on that we require. Okay, so I think that's good enough for that. If I wanted to animate, I'll just do this really quickly. If I wanted to animate that expansion as well, and wanted it to change shape, I could click on the stopwatch there, which has placed the keyframe in. I can go down to 10 seconds, and I could then, let's pull that going in there like that. Like that, and then that's now, as you notice, this time it hasn't placed the keyframe in there, so I would need to.
You need to the mask.
Yeah, I've just done that wrong, haven't I?
Yeah, the mask, but not expansion.
Yeah, I've just done that wrong. Yeah, just realised as I did it. Let me back step a little bit. What did I do there? Yes. Once the expansion is only to set the shape, I need the mask path now that I'm animating it. No, I've done it wrong again. What am I doing here? Right, there we go. Okay, So even though I'm using the mask expansion to actually change the position, it's actually the mask path that I use to animate that transition between the 2 points, as you can see. Okay, so if you're trying to mask something that's moving, a complicated object, and you would obviously, unless it's going in a very linear path, that item, you might have to go through frame by frame and track the edge. But it is possible to do, and I have had to do that many times, where I've gone through frame by frame and matched the mask actually to the object. But that's how you would basically do that. Okay, so that's masking. Right, parenting. I think we're nearly at the end. What are we at? 11:26. That's fine. Right, parenting allows one layer to follow the other. In animation, the animation movements. This can get quite complicated if I don't explain it well, basically. So on this example here, I might have a movement, something happening, an animation happening on this layer, and I want this layer to match, to follow that movement. What I can do is, yes, I can animate this layer here with exactly the same attributes that this one has. However, it's easier. Find my layer. Let's clean this up a second. Get rid of that one. And that one. So, what animation do I have on here already? Okay. Oh, I've already got there. That's why. Let me just turn that off. Jump ahead. Okay, so at the moment I have this layer here, which is moving from where it is in between these two keyframes. Let's move these out a little bit. It's moving from that position to that position. However, I want this item here to move with it. Now, I could go in and put exactly the same position points in here. However, they wouldn't be the same because its position data is actually not the same as here. As you can see, it's, oh, actually is. No, it's not. 948, yes it is. Oh, its anchor point is different, that's why. Ignore that. So what I basically want to do is I want this second one to move with this one. What I can do is this curly thing here is the parent for this whole layer. I can also parent individual attributes to individual attributes on other layers. However, if I want to pair the whole layer, which means everything on that layer will match this layer. What I do is I left click on this item and you'll get this thing sticking. You have to hold the button down here. You don't just press it once. Hold it down, bring it up to this layer here, and it will do that. And if I then let go, you'll notice it also says hold shift on the actual timeline. It's telling you it's doing something there. Right, when I let go of it, nothing changes here. However, in this parent and link, this is now telling me that this layer is parented to layer 1, which is the layer number here. All these layers have a number here. And this layer is now parented to that layer. So if I now rotate, I'm not going to move it, I'm actually going to rotate it here. Both layers should actually rotate, which they are doing. Thank God. Or this animation that I've already placed in here, moving between there and there, it'll actually move with it. Now that doesn't mean that I can't animate this layer in itself. I can still place an animation on this layer to do, let's say I want it to go down. Now what it will actually do is it will carry out both. So it will, as you see, it's trying to do It's still moving in that direction, but it's going down at the same time. So it can get complicated. But in general, this layer now is matching this layer above. It's following it. Now it's called parenting because obviously the parent is the layer that is the parent, and this would be considered the child. It's the second layer that's parented it. So it's holding its hand. It's taking it wherever it goes. Now, if I wanted, let me just make sure I'm not jumping majorly ahead of my presentation here. Yep, so we'll explain that there. So I've shown that there. This is the pick-wick. It's called the pick-whip to enable to match the layers to each other. Well, sorry, parent the layers to each other. And I've shown you that there are other pick whips available for each of these. However, you can only pick whip the position data from this layer to the position data of another layer. You can't, I don't think you can anyway. In most occasions, you can't pick whip different attributes to other different attributes on the, you can to some degree, but you'll get majorly confused if you start doing that. Now, let me just try that. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. I'm going to remove that parenting for a second. Now, if I wanted to only, back at 0. If I only wanted the rotation aspect of this one, so if this one rotates as well, I would just parent the rotation function to there. So now, if this top one rotates, they both rotate. However, we've got an animation in here already of this movement, but we haven't parented that part of it. So that will only affect that layer. So if you want to parent the whole layer, it's this top one. If it's individual aspects, then you would parent those aspects together. So now if I put in a rotation up here as well, going, now it will do that. Now, as you noticed, the rotation there that I've placed in up here, it's rotating around a strange place. They're not rotating, which one's which? That's that layer, and that's that layer. And that's because I think that's on my next slide. Let's see if it is. No. Yeah, I've done that bit. Positioned there. This line that you can see, I'll come back to the anchor point in a moment when we get to that slide. This line here shows the actual path of travel of those keyframes that we placed in. So there and there is the actual path between there. Now you'll notice that there's some little toggles on here again. If I wanted to manipulate that path to make it go in an arc or something between these 2 points, I could use those to change that. And then the direction of travel between those would go along that path. We won't go into it that because it can get messy. Right, anchor point. This is the other aspect that is on one of the attributes down here, which can cause a few problems. Let me add some. As you'll notice here, when we have this rotation layer parented to this rotation layer up here, you don't get anything in this box here. That only tells you that if it's the entire layer that's parented. If it's just an attribute, one of these items down here, this data here will turn red. And when that turns red, what it's telling you is that there's something called an expression that's been added And I can see that expression by opening this drop down here. We have a expression rotation. And what this expression is basically saying is this layer is parented to this rotation up here, the transform rotation on this layer. Okay. Now, if I didn't want that there anymore, obviously when I was removing the parenting up here, I just used that and I removed it. If I don't want this, this parenting here, it's no good me putting a keyframe in, that won't remove it. What I need to do is open the drop down and I can just highlight the expression and delete it. And then it will go back to nothing. Go ahead, whoever's going to speak. Oh, I heard somebody on mute then, I thought it was Matthew.
No, didn't know he was unmuted.
Oh, okay. I heard somebody unmuting, so I thought you were going to. I thought I'd missed something there, because there's literally so much to cover. It's unbelievable. Yeah, so that's how you would remove a parenting if you needed to get rid of it. If you've done it by accident and you wanted to get rid of it, there's probably other ways of doing it. But that's the way I always remove it. Now the anchor point, which is this top one here. The position, let me just get rid of this layer a second so I'm not getting confused which one I'm working with. At the moment I have, and we'll get rid of that animation. Let's just bring the item back down here. Now at the moment, this here is the center of my item. So if I rotate this in any way, it's going to rotate around that anchor point. It's not going to rotate around the center point of the item. What I would need to do is move this item, which is a masked piece of video, by the way. It's the same video that we had earlier. I just masked a block off. So because it's a piece of masked video, the center of that piece of video probably was actually over here. But I want that center point to be here because I want this to spin around this center point here. So what I need to do is manually move that center back. So what I do is I just go over this and you can go over the actual item and move your mouse left, backwards and forwards like this. And I just move that center point back to where I want it to be. Now obviously doing that, I've now moved the item down here. So I'm now going to need to move the position back so the item's back where it is. Now when I rotate it, it will rotate around that center point. And likewise, if I wanted, just put that back at 0, if I wanted it to rotate around this top brick, I would need to move my anchor point down. Well, move the video down so it's over the anchor point, and then, or you can do it the other way. That it really doesn't matter. Basically, like that. So any rotation, and also if this was a 3D layer, that would also work in 3D around your anchor point. So your anchor point can actually be within 3D space as well. So you need to be careful with that if you ever go 3D. Okay, now the anchor point that's active there now, which is fine for that rotation there. If I reparent this, reparent that layer, which is that one. I didn't have any animation on that, did I? No. Excuse me a second, let me just familiarize myself with what's going on here. Why is that on its side? That's that one. Oh, it's because I left a rotation layer, that's why. Right, okay. So this layer here now, if I just move him well away over here somewhere. Right, this one has a anchor point, which, yeah, is at the top. And his anchor point is at the top as well. However, if I parent this layer now to this layer, and I rotate here, this layer will rotate around his anchor point and not this anchor point anymore, as you'll see. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind, that that anchor point becomes the active one when it's parented. However, I can still rotate that item individually, but this anchor point is active in terms of his movement. So you could end up with some quite complicated movement going on by doing that. Right, let's go back to the presentation, see about that. Anchor point. Okay, so on the last couple of slides now, because we need to get finished up. That's basically parenting. It can get quite complicated if if you mess things up. If you try and keep it simple, it can work. I've got to admit, it was one of the first things that I completely messed me up when I was learning After Effects. I completely lost my head with it because I wanted it to do something, and it was just, and normally it was because the anchor point was in the wrong place and it was rotating around the wrong position. So being aware of the anchor point being active for the parent rather than the child helps a lot. So in terms of shape layers, that's another one of these 6 items that you can place on the timeline. Not going to go into that too much because it's exactly the same as Illustrator would be. It's a vector item. You put the shape layer down onto the timeline, and you're then using the pen tool or the shape tools at the top. Here you've got a rectangle tool, where I could draw a rectangle out. Now, if I do that directly, I notice there I haven't made a shape layer. I can draw directly on here, which I just have done, and it's created a shape layer automatically down on the timeline. Let me just do that again. So I didn't actually have a shape layer. That's the quicker way to do it. Grab the shape tool or the pen tool, and it automatically makes a shape layer on the timeline. And then within that, you have all the usual functions, your path, any stroke, color, you can transform. There ends up being a ridiculous amount of transform functions actually, because you've got your main layer transform, but you also have a transform for the shape. So it can start getting complicated. So it's best to transform the shape rather than using the layer transform here, unless you need to do it. So try and actually manipulate your shape using these ones rather than the layer. I think that's all that really needs to be said about shape layers, because everyone should be very familiar with that. As it says there, it's vector based, so it will not lose quality as it enlarged or shrunken down. So I've shown that, so you can use the tools at the top, the rectangle tool. There's all your items. There's a ridiculous amount of things you can manipulate in there to make exactly the shape and color that you require. Right, adjustment layers are another one where you can, this is exactly the same as Photoshop, Illustrator. You can place a layer on the timeline, put an effect on there, say a blur layer, and it will then blur everything every other layer that is below it. Very useful if you want to, say, blur some video out in the background to make some text more visible at a certain point in the video, which I've done sort of recently, where some text came up and it was getting a bit lost in the video background. So I basically put an adjustment layer in, dropped a blur effect on, put a couple of keyframes in to say, at this point there's no blur, at this point there is blur, and the background then drops out of focus so that you can see the text nice and easy. Right, the last section. When you've actually completed your video then and you are getting ready to render, there's a number of different ways that you can take your video out from the system, from After Effects. The first way is to send the video to the render queue. Here you would make sure that the actual composition that you are wanting to output is selected, not one of your many other comps that you might have open. So make sure that it's actually the comp, That's why I call mine construct. So because I always know that that's the final one. Sometimes you can end up with compositions that look very similar to each other. It might look like your final composition, but it's actually bits are missing because you've got comps within comps within comps. And you make sure that it's actually your final constructed comp that you're exporting. Once again, I have made that mistake a number of times. I've actually exported one of my working comps and not the actual final construct. So you can send it to the render queue by going composition at the top of the menu, add to the render queue. And what it will then do is open this render queue. I will go to the actual thing here. So this is my composition I'm wanting to render out. I'll go composition, composition, add to the render queue. And what it will do is it will open another tab on your timeline here, which is the render queue. Let me get rid of that one that was in there already. And in here, you'll see it will have the name of the comp that you've actually just sent to it. So if I'd actually sent comp 2, let's do that as well, to it, you'll notice that this comp is the comp 2. Because you might send a number of comps to the render queue to actually the export. In this occasion, we are just going to do number 1, so I can get rid of that one. You don't really need to set the best setting, this top render settings, unless you're doing something, I've never really touched that one. What you do need to set is these other 2 items here, the quality and the where you're exporting it to. So if you actually left click on this lossless, you'll get a window coming up. And this is where you tell it what kind of file you're wanting to export. Now using the render queue, you don't have MP4 function or H.264 or any of those kind of codecs to use. You can export a PNG sequence, which if you were exporting a PNG sequence, that you would export that to your, if you remember right back at the start, we made a folder called AE exports right at the top of the Windows folder. You would export it out into there, and you could then import that PNG sequence into Premiere to do your final build with your sound effects and your music. So that's one of the options you have there. If I did select PNG sequence, here, if I'm just wanting to send the video out with the, let's say there was a black background, which there is here, it will go out with this black background. If I was just wanting to send these items out here, this odd shape and these 2 boxes without the can't remember if I had actually placed a black solid under there. I don't think I did. So I think this is transparent. Then I would need to select RGB plus alpha. And if I do that, it will, on the PNG sequence that goes out, obviously you'll only have these 3 items, and this will all be transparent in the background. So it's important to remember to select that if that's what you're actually wanting to do. The other options you've got here, which are rarely used really by me, I mean, you can export at QuickTime. It does create, that can also go out with an alpha. However, it creates a massive file size, really horrible, don't like to use it. So I would generally tend not to do that. If you are exporting a video file, obviously this does not work with a PNG sequence, and you do want some audio to go out with it, you would select that down here. I have that to off because it's going to be a PNG sequence if we do this. There is AVI and stuff up here as well, but again, that comes out as a massive file size and it's horrible, and I wouldn't want to do it. If you wanted to export just a sound, you've got that there. Yeah, or MP3 even. So those are the main ones that you would use. Normal procedure for us is we either tend to PNG sequence out like this, or we would send, or the way I work is the third option we have here, which is actually importing the After Effects sequence directly into Premiere, which I'll go through in a second. So that would be one function. Let's just leave it as PNG sequence for now. And here you need to tell it where you want that to go. So you would navigate to your actual output folder, which let's just say in here would be this AE exports, which is empty in this particular case. Give the sequence a name or leave it as construct, whatever you have there, and then continue on from there, and then press render at the end here, and that will render out to your that folder. Now, if we go to the next one, so that's that all there. There's your lossless. You select the file type, been through all that, and render, been through that. The other option is to, when you have your comp selected, you can send it to the media encoder queue. So what that will do is, that will, as soon as you press that, it'll open Adobe Media Encoder, and I won't go through that, but basically when a media encoder opens, you can then select MP4. You get a lot more options. However, bear in mind, this is fine if you're not doing a final construct of your video, as in adding music. This is fine if you're just exporting what you have in After Effects without doing a final build. So you will be sending it to the encoder just to export that video, and that's it. So I generally tend not to use that unless it is suitable for that. Cool. Now the third option is what I tend to do, which I'll just talk about because it's not, I'm not demonstrating it here, is you can, actually I will open Premiere. What you can do, and again you might know about this, is you can import this sequence directly into Premiere, this After Effects file. I will just open anything here, just to demonstrate. Okay, so in fact in here, you'll see in a moment when it's loaded, I actually have a number of AE files. This is the only problem, is it tends to be a little bit slow when you first open After Effects, because it has to import the After Effects data. Basically, it has to import it from After Effects. So at the moment it's loading it, and we will get a picture here eventually. There we go. And yeah, basically this information, everything here is now coming from After Effects, because what I've done is I've double-clicked in the import here. I've gone to the actual After Effects project within our folder, pressed open, and what you'll get is this box come up, and you can then navigate to your actual comp within your comp folder, find the actual construct. In this case, I'll just go click any razor sharp construct, and then I'm not going to do it, but you'll press OK, and it'll import that After Effects construct into here. And then you can just drag it down, just like any other media, any video file. You can drag that down onto your timeline and add your legal lines over the top using a template that we have. And you can edit your sound, whatever it is you're wanting to do underneath. And so from there, you can then do your final export out from there. So that's the way I work. I find that works in terms of back in After Effects, if I have a number of different languages and I have copy within here, I want to click between layers to have Danish copy, and then I don't have to render out a Danish version to PNG sequence and then a English version to PNG sequence. I can basically just click between the layers, activate the layers in After Effects, go back to Premiere, and then export that particular language out, and it's instantly changed in there because it's the two to speak to each other. So for me, that works. I know the other guys use PNG sequences more, but it can be very useful to speed things up if you have a lot of languages to export. I think, and that's pretty good timing because we've got 5 minutes left, that's about it for now. hope that hasn't been a bit too death by PowerPoint and has gone through some stuff that might be new to some people. Probably, I would say 90% of you that might be, you know it all already, and in which case I apologise, I've bored you, but hopefully that some of that has been new stuff and might help you in some way. So, any questions?
I just have to say a massive round of applause. Goes to you, Andy, a standing ovation. It was a really good presentation. You went into a lot of detail, and yeah, I mean, it's basically a crash course, a super crash course for getting started with After Effects. I mean, from our experience, we can tell you that to sort of try to join the dots between all the stuff that happened in today's presentations and, looking for tutorials online, it would take you ages, not just 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hang on, before you say anything more, I've just realised there's one thing that I meant to put in the presentation that isn't there, and that's it. I don't know if you're still seeing this. You should be. Is these items down here? These 3, because these can catch people out as well. What these do is add extra items onto here. If I turn all of those off, you'll notice they will disappear. So you've got no motion blur. You've got none of those options that you want to see are actually there. It's because you have to activate them down here. So if you find that one of those is missing, I don't normally have that end one on because it's just in point, out point. So that one you can always turn off. But yeah, if anything that I've shown you here is missing, it's because one of these isn't ticked down here. That meant to be in the presentation, and I just realised as I was sat here that I missed that off because that's quite important. Okay, sorry, carry on now.
Yeah, especially this last point is something that in tutorials they don't tell you. If you press that button by mistake, basically you're screwed. So thanks, Andy, for pointing all these things out. So we'll be sharing this presentation with you guys, and even the recording, we'll just edit it down to make it a bit more snappy. So we'll have all the basics for you guys, and in the next workshop will be a bit more fast. So we won't kind of stop at every step. You should know how to make a composition. You should know how to make a solid from now on. So in the next workshops will be a bit more fast to work with, but everything will be based on this presentation. As you can see, motion graphics, 75% of it's technical, boring stuff. So we're bound to our tools. So these things are very important in our everyday life. So again, thanks, Andy. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask wherever you want, here in the chat, individually. We're here to help you, and hopefully by the end of these workshops we'll all be creating some cool videos together. That's the idea. So yeah, if there aren't any questions, I know it's noon, everyone wants to go to lunch, so thanks everyone for joining, and we'll be announcing the date for the second workshop soon. We just need to do some things between ourselves first, and once we're set, we'll let you know when we're ready to host the second workshop. So yeah, thanks guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you again.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I can
Cheers,
go and
guys.
hop now, can I?
Yeah, exactly. Have a good day, guys.
Ciao.
Bye,
Thanks a
thanks
lot,
a lot.
guys.
Thank you a lot. Bye.